Welcome to the Nightmare Zoo, where we feed your deepest fears.
In 1887, two fur trappers walked out of a frozen basin in the Canadian backcountry after 6 weeks snowbound, and neither of them spoke of what had kept them alive. Over a century later, 4 search and rescue personnel walked into that same basin looking for a missing family. Only one walked out. This is the sealed case file the province never wanted opened. This is Starving Hollow.
Case File 04 and 19. What was eating the search party at Starving Hollow? The following account has been reconstructed from Ranger Grant Sutter's official incident debrief, Corporal Aileen Fontaine's recovered radio logs, and the personal notes of Joseph Nakogi, a Cree land guide who volunteered to join the search. Sutter is the only member of the 4-person search team to walk out of Starving Hollow. This case file remained sealed for 11 months. The Hargrove family missed their scheduled checkout by 4 days before anyone noticed. That was the first thing that bothered Ranger Grant Sutter. Not that a family had gone quiet in the backcountry. People did that all the time. Cell service in Starving Hollow was non-existent, and half the permit holders forgot their own return dates. What bothered him was that nobody at the outfitter's office could remember booking them a spot in that zone at all, even though their permit was sitting right there in the file, dated, signed, stamped. He didn't think much of it at the time. Paperwork got misplaced. He radioed it in, pulled together a team, and by 6 the next morning they were loading canoes at the put-in under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. There were 4 of them. Sutter led. Corporal Aileen Fontaine came from the provincial police, young, sharp, the kind of officer who double-checked her double-checks. Dale Whitlow was a volunteer tracker, 61 years old, had found more lost hunters in this district than anyone alive, quiet in a way that made people trust him immediately. And then there was Joseph Nakogi. Sutter hadn't wanted to call him in. Joe was 73, hadn't guided a search in a decade, and the last time Sutter had mentioned Starving Hollow to him, the old man had gone very still and told him, flatly, that he wasn't interested in ever setting foot there again. But Joe knew that watershed better than any map Parks Ontario had on file, and a family was missing. So Sutter called him anyway, and Joe surprised him by saying yes before he'd even finished asking. "I'm not doing it for the Hargroves," Joe told him at the put-in, loading his pack into the 3rd canoe without meeting anyone's eyes. "I'm doing it because if something's woken up out there, somebody who knows what it is should be standing next to you when you find it." Nobody asked him what he meant. They should have. The paddle in took most of the morning, 6 kilometers of black water under low cloud, the portages growing narrower and more overgrown the deeper they went, until the last one, a rough 800-meter carry around a set of rapids, dropped them into a basin the topo map simply labeled Site 14. Joe called it something else in Cree, low under his breath, and when Fontaine asked him to translate it, he just shook his head and kept walking. They found the Hargroves' campsite an hour later, and Sutter knew before he was even fully into the clearing that they weren't going to find the Hargroves alive. The tent was standing but collapsed on one side, canvas shredded in 3 long parallel tiers. A cooking pot sat upright on cold coals, a half-eaten meal congealed inside it, undisturbed by animals, which struck Sutter as wrong before he understood why. Nothing in these woods left food sitting that long. Scattered through the underbrush at the clearing's edge were bones. Not many. Enough. Long bones, cracked open lengthwise, the marrow scraped clean, and Fontaine was the one who identified the 2 smaller fragments near the fire ring as almost certainly human before her voice caught and she stopped talking entirely. Whitlow crouched over a set of tracks pressed deep into the mud near the creek and went pale in a way Sutter had never seen on him. Bare feet, no boot, no animal pad, just wide, bare, human-shaped feet, except each stride measured nearly 2 meters, and the depth of the print suggested something carrying enormous weight on a frame that left no other trace of its width. "That's not possible," Fontaine said. "No," Joe agreed quietly. "It isn't." He walked to a birch at the clearing's edge where the bark had been stripped away in long vertical strokes far above head height, exposing raw white wood beneath. And beneath that, something, had carved a rough, deliberate mark. 3 vertical lines crossed by 1 horizontal, deep enough that sap still wept from the cuts. "This is a warning," Joe said. "Somebody left this, or something did, mocking one." He turned to face the rest of them, and for the first time since the put-in, he looked genuinely frightened. "I need you all to understand what I think we're dealing with, and I need you to actually listen, because if you don't believe me, you're going to die not believing me." He told them the story then, standing in that ruined campsite with the light already starting to fail. A wendigo, he said, wasn't just a monster. It was what was left of a person after they crossed a line that should never be crossed. After they ate what they should never have eaten, usually in starvation, usually in winter, usually with no other choice left, and the hunger that followed never, ever ended. It grew into the body, hollowed it, stretched it, turned the person's own desperation into something that could never again be satisfied by anything except more of the same. Starving Hollow had a history, Joe told them. An 1887 fur trading party, snowbound for 6 weeks. Only 2 men walked out in spring, and neither of them spoke again for the rest of their lives about what had kept them alive. "It's still hungry," Joe said. "It's always still hungry. That's the whole of it. That's the only thing you need to understand about what's out here." Fontaine wanted to call it in and retreat to the last portage before dark. Sutter agreed with her, right up until the wind shifted and from somewhere deep in the tree line north of camp, a voice called out. It called Dale Whitlow's name. It called it in a voice that Whitlow, standing rigid in the center of the clearing with his face draining of all color, identified in a whisper as his wife's. His wife who had been dead for 6 years. "That's not her," Joe said immediately, gripping Whitlow's arm. "Dale, look at me. That is not her voice. That thing is wearing her voice like a coat. Do you understand me?" Whitlow didn't answer. He was already staring past all of them into the dark between the trees, and something in his face had gone somewhere none of them could follow. They didn't sleep. Sutter set the 4 of them in a tight ring around a built-up fire, rifles and a shotgun laid across their knees. And for the first 3 hours nothing happened at all except the fire snapping and the wind working through the pines. And Sutter let himself believe just slightly that daylight would find them all exactly where they sat. Whitlow broke the ring a little after 2 in the morning. Sutter never heard him go. One moment the old tracker was seated across the fire, shotgun in his lap, eyes fixed somewhere past the flames. The next Fontaine was on her feet screaming his name into the dark, because his spot by the fire was empty and his shotgun was lying in the snow where he'd set it down, deliberately, like a man laying down a burden before walking somewhere he needed both hands free to go. They found him 40 minutes later, 60 meters north, by the sound Fontaine made when her flashlight beam crossed what was left. Sutter has never given a full description of it in any official report, and he refused to give one in his statement, and the only detail that made it into the file at all was the coroner's later note that the remains were consistent with an animal attack of unknown origin, atypical bite radius, evidence of prolonged feeding. What Sutter told Joe, privately, weeks later, was that whatever had called Whitlow out into the dark hadn't killed him quickly, and that the ground for 10 meters in every direction told its own story about how long it had taken, and that he would be grateful for the rest of his life that Fontaine's flashlight had died before she could see all of it clearly. They didn't retreat that night. They tried. The storm that rolled in an hour before dawn had other plans, a sudden, vicious whiteout that dropped visibility to arm's length and buried the portage trail under snow so fast Sutter genuinely believed, for one deranged moment, that the storm itself had been summoned to keep them there. They sheltered in the ruin of the Hargroves' tent, the 3 of them left, and Joe went through his pack and produced a small bundle of dried cedar and sweetgrass, and began speaking low and steady in Cree. And Sutter did not understand a word of it and had never in his life wanted so badly to believe that words could keep something out. It was Fontaine who found the trapper's journal, half buried under a rotted-out cache near the old portage, its leather cover gone soft and black with a century of damp, most of its pages fused solid. But 3 were legible, and what was written on them, in a shaking, deteriorating hand, was the last testimony of a man named Eau Claire, dated the winter of 1887, describing 6 weeks snowbound in this exact basin, describing a companion named Delisle, who had gone first, describing what Delisle had done and become and what Delisle had asked the others to do to survive, and the final line, written larger than anything before it, smeared with something that had once been dark red, read simply, "It does not stop being hungry when the winter ends." "It's Delisle," Joe said, staring at the page. "It's still him. It's been him this whole time." That was when they heard it laugh. It came from close, closer than anything had come yet, close enough that the sound of it, wet and low and entirely wrong, seemed to come from all 4 directions of the clearing at once. Sutter swung his rifle up and saw it for the first time, fully at the tree line, not moving, simply letting itself be seen, a shape easily 9 feet at the shoulder, unnaturally gaunt, ribs and spine visible beneath skin gone gray-black and stretched tight. Antlers, or something that had grown like antlers, rising from a skull too narrow and too long to be human anymore, and a mouth when it opened again to laugh a second time, filled with teeth that had clearly once, a very long time ago, been ordinary human teeth. "Don't run," Joe said, voice shaking but level. "Running is what it wants. It herds. It's been herding us since the campsite. Fontaine ran anyway. Sutter has never blamed her for it. She made it maybe 30 meters before it took her. And Sutter, God forgive him, he has said this in every version of the story he's ever told, did not go after her. He grabbed Joe by the collar and hauled him the opposite direction, deeper into the trees, because some animal part of his brain understood in that instant that there was no saving Fontaine, that there had never been a version of that night where all 4 of them walked out, and the only choice left on the table was how many of them didn't. They ran through the storm blind, snow driving sideways, the ground pitching downward into a section of the hollow neither of them knew. And behind them, twice, they heard something call out in Fontaine's voice, perfectly, calling Sutter's name, asking him to come back, and both times Joe grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise and simply said, "No." And Sutter kept running because some part of him understood that the alternative was becoming the next entry in somebody else's case file. They went to ground in a rock overhang above a frozen creek bed, and Joe, breathing hard, blood from a torn scalp freezing down one side of his face, pulled a road flare from his pack, the last one, meant for signaling, not for this, and told Sutter what he should have told him back at the put-in. "Fire," Joe said. "Real fire, not a beam of light. It doesn't like it. My grandmother used to say it remembers being cold before it remembers being hungry. I don't know if that's true. I've never had to find out." They didn't have long to wait. It came down into the creek bed a few minutes later, unhurried, its long stride crossing the frozen water in 3 strides. And when Joe lit the flare and thrust it forward, the thing recoiled. Not far, not fast, but enough. A flinch that read as almost human in its irritation, and it made a sound that was somewhere between a growl and a word, and Sutter would swear until the day he died that the word had been Eau Claire. It was Joe who understood first what that meant. That somewhere, underneath a century of hunger and antler and rot, there was still a shred of the man who had survived that winter alongside it, and that it recognized the name of the only person left alive who might have once mattered to it. "Go," Joe told Sutter, already backing toward the open creek bed, flare raised high, voice cracking with something that wasn't quite fear anymore. "Go now, Grant. I'm going to buy you the only head start you're going to get." Sutter has never forgiven himself for listening. He ran. Behind him he heard Joe's voice rise, steady and clear even as it broke, speaking words Sutter still doesn't understand and never asked anyone to translate. And then he heard the flare hiss out, and then he heard nothing from Joe at all, ever again. And he did not stop running until the trees broke open ahead of him into the wide white nothing of the frozen lake and the last portage, and impossibly, dawn. A floatplane pilot doing an early supply run spotted him from the air just past 7. A single figure staggering across open ice with no pack, no rifle, and half his left hand lost to frostbite he hadn't even registered yet. He was airlifted out within the hour. He has not been back to Starving Hollow since, and when the follow-up search team went in 4 days later, 6 wardens, 2 OPP tactical officers, full daylight, full support, they found the ruined campsite, They found fragments consistent with Corporal Fontaine. They found Dale Whitlow's shotgun exactly where he'd set it down, and they found at the mouth of the creek bed a single road flare, fully spent, lying in a scorched circle in the snow. They never found Joseph Nakagi. Not a trace. Sutter has always believed that means something, though he has never been able to explain to any investigator's satisfaction what exactly he thinks it means. The zone was closed indefinitely within the week, officially for geological survey, and the Hargrove family's disappearance remains unsolved on paper, filed as presumed loss to exposure, though nobody who has read the full case file believes that, and nobody who reads it is meant to. Sutter gave his statement once, and only once, 6 weeks after the search, sitting in a warden's office with his bandaged hand in his lap, and at the very end of it, unprompted, he added one final detail that the investigating officer almost left out of the transcript entirely because it didn't fit any category the report had a box for. He said that 2 nights ago in his own kitchen 300 kilometers from Starving Hollow, with every door locked and every light on, something outside his window had called his name in Joseph Nakagi's voice, asking very politely to be let in. He has not slept with the lights off since. He does not believe, whatever the closure paperwork says, that it is finished being hungry.